The golden hour painted everything in warm amber light as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Highway 47 stretched endlessly in both directions, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through farmland and forgotten dreams. Alongside this lonely road sat Mabel's Diner, a small beacon of comfort for travelers who needed more than just gas and directions. The neon sign buzzed softly, casting a pink glow that read "Good Food, Good People" in cursive letters. Through the large windows, you could see the warm interior, red vinyl booths worn smooth by countless conversations, a chrome counter that reflected the overhead lights, and walls decorated with faded photographs of the town's better days. Letitia Washington moved through the diner with practiced grace, her uniform crisp despite the long shift ahead. At 42, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her dark eyes holding both kindness and strength earned through years of facing life's challenges. She had worked at Mabel's for 3 years now, ever since moving to this small town searching for a fresh start and some peace. The dinner rush was winding down. Mrs. Henderson sat in her usual spot by the window, slowly working through a slice of apple pie while reading a romance novel. 2 truck drivers occupied stools at the counter, sharing stories about difficult routes and family back home. A young couple in the corner booth laughed quietly over shared fries, their hands intertwined across the table. This was Letitia's sanctuary. In a world that often seemed harsh and unwelcoming, the diner represented something pure, a place where people came together over simple food and honest conversation. She knew every regular customer by name, remembered how they liked their coffee, and always had a kind word ready. "Letitia, honey, can I get a coffee refill?" called out Jake, one of the truck drivers. "Coming right up, sweetheart," she replied, moving smoothly behind the counter with the coffee pot. The rich aroma filled the air as she poured, steam rising in gentle spirals. "You're an angel, you know that?" Jake smiled, wrapping his weathered hands around the warm mug. "Just doing my job," Letitia responded, but the compliment warmed her heart. These small moments of human connection made everything worthwhile. In the back corner booth, 2 men sat quietly eating their dinner. They had arrived separately about an hour ago, but ended up at the same table after a brief, friendly conversation. One was a powerfully built man with kind blue eyes and short blonde hair, wearing a simple gray t-shirt that couldn't quite hide his impressive physique. The other was even larger, with dark skin, a warm smile, and the kind of presence that made people feel safe just being near him. John Cena had been traveling cross-country, taking some time away from his busy schedule to clear his head and reconnect with regular people living regular lives. The diner reminded him of places from his childhood, where his grandfather would take him for pancakes on Sunday mornings. Dwayne Johnson was on his way to visit family, enjoying the rare luxury of anonymity. In a small town like this, people might recognize him eventually, but for now, he was just another customer enjoying a good meal and friendly service. Neither man sought attention or recognition. They were content to sit quietly, sharing an occasional comment about the food or the peaceful atmosphere. Both had noticed Letitia's professionalism and kindness, the way she made every customer feel welcomed and valued. The diner's clock showed 8:30 as the sun dipped lower. Outside, the parking lot was mostly empty except for the truck driver's rigs, Mrs. Henderson's old sedan, and the couple's small car. The evening felt peaceful, ordinary, like countless others in this little slice of Americana. Letitia wiped down tables and refilled napkin dispensers, humming softly to herself. The radio played old country songs at low volume, adding to the comfortable atmosphere. She felt grateful for this job, this place where she could work with dignity and respect. But peace is fragile, and sometimes it shatters without warning. The first sign of trouble came as a distant rumble, so faint that most people didn't notice it at first. But Letitia paused in her cleaning, her instincts picking up something different about this sound. It wasn't the usual highway traffic or even the deep growl of 18-wheelers. This was something else entirely, a low, threatening rumble that seemed to grow stronger with each passing second. The windows began to vibrate slightly, and the coffee in the pot rippled with tiny waves. John and Dwayne both looked up from their meals, their expressions growing alert. Years of experience had taught them to recognize potential trouble, and something about this approaching sound set off warning bells in their minds. The rumble grew louder, becoming a roar that seemed to fill the entire valley. Through the windows, they could see headlights cutting through the gathering dusk, not the steady beams of cars or trucks, but the harsh, erratic lights of motorcycles. Letitia's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cleaning cloth. She had seen motorcycle groups before, and most were decent people just enjoying their freedom on the open road. But something about this group felt different, dangerous. The engines grew closer, their aggressive snarls promising that the peaceful evening was about to end. Whatever was coming would test everyone in the diner, but especially the woman who had worked so hard to find her place of safety in an often hostile world. The roar outside reached a crescendo before suddenly cutting off, leaving an ominous silence that felt heavy as lead. Car doors didn't slam. These weren't cars. Instead, the sudden quiet was broken by the metallic clicks of kickstands and the creak of leather as riders dismounted. Through the windows, dark silhouettes moved in the parking lot. 6 motorcycles sat lined up like mechanical predators, their chrome gleaming under the diner's neon sign. The men who climbed off them moved with the swagger of people who expected the world to step aside. Letitia felt her stomach tighten. She had learned to read people quickly in her years of service work, and everything about these approaching figures screamed danger. Their body language, the way they clustered together, the deliberate slowness of their movements, it all spelled trouble for anyone unlucky enough to be in their path. The other customers sensed it too. Mrs. Henderson glanced nervously toward the door, her romance novel forgotten. The young couple stopped laughing, their hands gripping each other tighter. Even the truck drivers, men who had seen their share of rough places, shifted uncomfortably on their stools. Only John and Dwayne remained calm, though their postures subtly changed. Both men had dealt with bullies and troublemakers before. They recognized the signs and quietly prepared themselves for whatever might come through that door. The entrance exploded inward with a violent shove that sent the glass door crashing against the wall. 6 men strode through, their heavy boots thundering against the linoleum floor. Leather vests covered in patches and studs, chains hanging from their belts, and attitudes that filled the room like poisonous smoke. Their leader was impossible to miss, tall, scarred, with mirrored sunglasses that reflected the diner's lights even though darkness was falling outside. A cruel smile played across his lips as he surveyed the room, like a predator choosing prey. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice carrying the arrogance of someone who had never been held accountable for his actions. "Look what we have here. A nice little place, perfect for some entertainment." The other bikers laughed, harsh sounds that made the peaceful diner feel suddenly violated. One of them kicked a chair, sending it scraping across the floor. Another leaned against the jukebox, his fingers trailing over its surface like he was deciding whether to break it. Letitia forced herself to step forward, her servers training overriding her fear. She had dealt with difficult customers before, though none quite like these. "Good evening," she managed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Table for 6? The leader's grin widened, showing teeth that looked more like fangs in the harsh light. "Oh, she's polite," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I like that. Shows she knows her place." Warning bells went off in Letitia's mind. The way he said place carried implications that had nothing to do with restaurant seating. But she maintained her professional demeanor, pulling out her order pad with hands that only trembled slightly. "What can I get you tonight?" she asked, approaching their table with careful steps. "How about a smile, sweetheart?" One of the bikers called out, his shaved head gleaming with sweat. "That's our first order." The group erupted in laughter that sounded like breaking glass. Another leaned forward, alcohol heavy on his breath. "Yeah, maybe she can sit with us. Keep us company while we eat." Letitia's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "I'm here to serve food and drinks. If you'd like to order something from the menu, I'm happy to help." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The leader slowly removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that held no warmth, no humanity. "She's got a mouth on her," he said quietly, then louder so everyone could hear. "Maybe someone needs to teach her some manners." Every customer in the diner froze. The elderly woman clutched her purse tighter. The young couple stared down at their plates. The truck drivers found sudden interest in their coffee cups. Fear filled the air like smoke from a fire. But Letitia had reached a breaking point. Years of dealing with condescension, disrespect, and worse had built up inside her like pressure in a kettle. She thought of her grandmother, who had cleaned houses for wealthy families who barely acknowledged her existence. She thought of her mother, who had endured insults while working multiple jobs to keep food on the table. "I deserve the same respect as anyone else in this diner," she said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silence. "You'll get your service, but you'll speak to me properly." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the leader's expression shifted from amusement to something much darker, much more dangerous. "You think you're in charge here?" he hissed, rising from his seat. "You're not. You'll learn your place, one way or another." The other bikers were on their feet now, sensing blood in the water. One spat on the floor near Letitia's shoes. Another started chanting mockingly, "Respect, respect, respect," until the word became meaningless noise. Letitia stood her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to run. She had drawn the line, and there was no taking it back now. The leader's hand flexed at his side, and she knew what was coming. In the corner booth, two sets of eyes watched everything unfold. John Cena's muscles tensed under his shirt. Beside him, Dwayne Johnson's hands slowly clenched into fists. Both men had seen enough to know where this was heading. The leader took another step toward Letitia, his shadow falling across her like a threat made physical. "Last chance," he growled. "Apologize, and maybe we'll go easy on you." But Letitia Washington had spent too many years bending, bowing, and backing down. Not tonight. Not here in the one place she had found peace. "No," she whispered, the word carrying the weight of every woman who had ever stood up to a bully. The leader's hand rose in the air, and time seemed to slow to a crawl as violence prepared to shatter the evening like a stone through glass. The slap cracked through the diner like a gunshot, sharp and vicious. Letitia's head snapped to the side, her cap flying off as she stumbled backward. The tray in her hands clattered to the floor, plates shattering in an explosion of ceramic and metal that echoed through the suddenly silent room. For a moment, nobody moved. The sound seemed to hang in the air, not just the slap itself, but what it represented, the crossing of a line that could never be uncrossed, the moment when cruelty showed its true face. Letitia caught herself against the counter, her cheek already beginning to swell. Tears of pain and humiliation burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these animals, who would see her tears as victory. The bikers erupted in cruel laughter, their voices filling the diner like poison. One of them picked up her fallen cap, twirling it on his finger before dropping it into a puddle of spilled coffee. Another kicked at the broken plates, sending shards skittering across the floor. "That's how you handle trash," the leader sneered, flexing his hand as if the slap had been nothing more than swatting a fly. "Hope you learned something." Mrs. Henderson half rose from her seat, her face pale with shock, but one of the bikers barked at her to sit down. She collapsed back into her booth, trembling. The truck drivers stared into their coffee cups, their faces flushed with shame at their own inability to act. The young couple huddled together, the woman's shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Letitia's legs felt like water beneath her, but she forced herself to stand straight. Her hand went to her burning cheek, feeling the heat and swelling already beginning. The taste of blood filled her mouth, where she had bitten her tongue. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the continuing laughter. "Just leave me alone." The leader cupped his ear mockingly. "What was that? Speak up, we can't hear you." But Letitia's voice had abandoned her. The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. She stood there, swaying slightly, feeling smaller and more vulnerable than she had in years. The sanctuary of the diner had been violated, turned into a place of humiliation and pain. The bikers were enjoying themselves now, feeding off her fear and the terror of the other customers. One of them reached across the counter and knocked over a stack of clean glasses, watching them crash to the floor with obvious delight. Another grabbed a salt shaker and emptied it onto a table, creating a white mountain that he swept away with his sleeve. "Come on, boys," the leader announced, settling back into his booth like a king claiming his throne. "Let's order something. Our waitress needs to remember what she's here for." But before he could continue his torment, a sound cut through the cruel laughter, the slow, deliberate scrape of a chair against the floor. Every head turned toward the corner booth, where two men were rising from their seats. They had been so quiet, so unobtrusive, that most people had forgotten they were there. But now, as they stood, their presence filled the room like gathering storm clouds. The laughter died in the bikers' throats as they realized they were no longer the most dangerous things in the diner. John Cena moved first, his blue eyes locked on the gang with an intensity that made the air crackle. His voice, when it came, was calm and steady, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "That's enough." Two simple words, but they hit the room like a physical force. The leader's grin faltered slightly as he sized up this new challenger. Here was someone who didn't look away, didn't cower, didn't apologize for taking up space. Beside him, Dwayne Johnson stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to darken half the diner. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder, carrying a promise that made smart people step aside. "You're going to leave her alone. Right now." The confrontation that had been building all evening suddenly crystallized into something sharp and dangerous. On one side stood 6 leather-clad bullies, who had spent their lives terrorizing people weaker than themselves. On the other stood 2 men, who looked like they had never backed down from anything in their lives. Letitia looked up from behind the counter, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. These strangers, she didn't even know their names, were willing to stand between her and the monsters who had just humiliated her. For the first time since the bikers had entered, she felt a flicker of hope. The leader recovered quickly, his cruel smile returning as he looked the 2 men up and down. Well, he drawled. "Looks like we got ourselves some heroes. You boys think you're tough." "We don't think anything," Dwayne replied, his voice steady as granite. "We know." John took another step forward, placing himself directly between Letitia and the gang. His stance was relaxed but ready, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. "You've got 2 choices," he said quietly. "You can apologize to the lady and walk out of here, or you can try to go through us." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down in an ancient duel. Everyone in the diner held their breath, sensing that they were witnessing one of those moments that would be remembered and talked about for years to come. The leader's eyes darted between the 2 men, calculating odds, measuring threats. His gang was tough enough when it came to terrorizing waitresses and elderly women, but these 2 looked like they ate bullies for breakfast. But pride is a dangerous thing, and the leader had built his entire identity around never backing down, never showing weakness. To retreat now, in front of his men and these witnesses, would destroy everything he thought he was. His hand moved to his belt, fingers closing around something metallic. The other bikers tensed, reading their leader's body language. The peaceful diner had become a powder keg, and everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the spark. Letitia pressed herself against the counter, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Whatever happened next would determine whether justice existed in the world, or if cruelty always triumphed in the end. The leader's cruel smile widened as he made his choice. "Boys," he said softly, his voice carrying clearly through the silence. "Looks like we're going to have some fun after all." The explosion of violence was sudden and brutal. The leader's signal unleashed chaos as chairs scraped against the floor, and the bikers surged forward like a pack of wolves. What had been a peaceful diner moments before transformed into a battlefield where the sounds of shattering glass and splintering would fill the air. John Cena moved like lightning. The first biker to reach him swung a chain overhead, the metal links whistling through the air with deadly intent. But John ducked low, the chain passing inches above his head, and drove his shoulder into the man's stomach with devastating force. The biker folded like a broken hinge, crashing backward into an empty table that collapsed under his weight. Beside him, Dwayne Johnson faced 2 attackers simultaneously. One wielded a broken beer bottle, its jagged edges glinting in the fluorescent light. The other charged low, trying to tackle the massive man around the waist. Dwayne caught the bottle wielder's wrist in mid-swing, his grip like a steel vise, while using his free hand to grab his second attacker by the back of the neck. With a grunt of effort, Dwayne lifted both men and brought them together with a sickening crack. They crumpled to the floor, groaning and clutching their heads as they tried to remember where they were. The diner erupted in screams as the remaining customers scrambled for safety. Mrs. Henderson knocked over her coffee mug in her haste to reach the door, her romance novel forgotten on the floor. The young couple huddled in their booth, the woman sobbing as her boyfriend tried to shield her from the violence. One of the truck drivers grabbed his companion's arm, pulling him toward the exit as chairs and bodies flew through the air around them. But Letitia couldn't move. She crouched behind the counter, frozen by fear and fascination as she watched two strangers risk everything to defend her honor. Her cheeks still throbbed from a slap, but now she felt something else burning inside her chest. Hope. A biker with a shaved head and neck tattoos lunged at John with a switchblade, the steel catching the light as it sliced through the air. John twisted aside, the blade missing him by inches, and caught the man's wrist. With a sharp twist, he disarmed his attacker and sent him spinning into the jukebox, which sparked and went silent as the man slumped against it. The leader watched his men fall one by one, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. These weren't supposed to be fair fights. His gang was used to overwhelming opponents through numbers and intimidation. But these two men fought like they had trained for this their entire lives. "Take them down," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "All of you together." 3 bikers rushed Dwayne simultaneously, trying to bury him under their combined weight. Chains swung, fists flew, and boots kicked at his legs, but Dwayne stood like a mountain in a storm. He caught one attacker's chain mid-swing and yanked it so hard the man flew forward, crashing face first into the counter with a sickening thud. The second biker wrapped his arms around Dwayne's waist from behind, trying to bring him down through sheer determination. But Dwayne simply reached back, grabbed the man by his leather vest, and threw him over his shoulder like a sack of grain. The biker sailed through the air and landed on a table, which exploded into splinters beneath him. John was a whirlwind of controlled violence. Every movement was precise, calculated, devastatingly effective. A chair flew at his head, but he caught it mid-flight and spun it around, using it to block a chain while simultaneously driving his elbow into another attacker's ribs. The man doubled over, gasping for air, and John finished him with an uppercut that lifted him off his feet. The sound was incredible: crashes, thuds, the tinkling of broken glass, and the groans of defeated men. The smell of spilled beer and coffee mixed with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid odor of electrical sparks from the damaged jukebox. Through it all, Letitia watched with growing amazement. These men weren't just fighting, they were defending her. Every punch they threw, every attacker they defeated, was being done in her name. The humiliation she had felt began to transform into something else, something powerful and clean. The leader finally decided to enter the battle himself. He pulled a hunting knife from his belt, the blade gleaming wickedly in the fluorescent light. His scarred face was a mask of fury as he circled around behind John, looking for an opening. "Behind you!" Letitia screamed, finding her voice at last. John spun just as the leader lunged, the knife slicing through the air toward his chest. He threw himself backward, the blade missing him by millimeters, and grabbed a metal napkin dispenser from a nearby table. When the leader struck again, John blocked with the dispenser, the knife blade ringing against the metal like a bell. The leader snarled and pressed his attack, slashing wildly with the knife, while John used the dispenser like a shield. But Dwayne had finished with his opponents and now turned his attention to the leader. Moving with surprising speed for such a large man, he grabbed the leader's knife hand and squeezed. The leader screamed as bones cracked under the pressure. The knife clattered to the floor, and Dwayne lifted the man by his vest, holding him high in the air like a trophy of victory. "You want to hit women?" Dwayne growled, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet diner. "Let's see how you like fighting someone your own size." He threw the leader across the room like a rag doll. The man crashed into a booth, splintering the wooden bench, and rolled onto the floor, where he lay groaning and clutching his ribs. Suddenly, the diner was quiet except for the whimpering of defeated bikers and the electrical buzz from damaged lights. John and Dwayne stood in the center of the wreckage, breathing hard but victorious. Around them, 6 leather-clad bullies lay scattered like broken toys. The leader tried to push himself up on his elbows, blood trickling from his nose. His eyes found Letitia, and even in defeat, they burned with hatred. But now that hatred seemed pathetic, powerless, like the ranting of a madman. Letitia rose slowly from behind the counter, her legs shaking but her head held high. The 2 strangers turned toward her, their faces gentle despite the violence they had just unleashed. "Are you all right?" John asked softly. For the first time in hours, Letitia smiled. "I am now," she whispered, tears of gratitude streaming down her cheeks. But the leader wasn't finished. With a roar of desperate fury, he grabbed a broken chair leg from the debris around him and raised it like a club. His eyes were wild with the kind of rage that comes when a bully finally meets his match and can't accept defeat. The final confrontation was about to begin. The broken chair leg whistled through the air as the leader made his last desperate attack, his face contorted with the rage of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. But his movements were sluggish now, weakened by pain and the crushing realization that his world of intimidation and fear was crumbling around him. John Cena stepped forward calmly, his reflexes honed by years of facing down challenges. He caught the leader's wrist effortlessly, stopping the makeshift weapon inches from his face. For a moment, the 2 men stood frozen in that position, the bully straining with everything he had left, and John holding him back with what appeared to be minimal effort. "It's over," John said quietly, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. The leader's eyes widened as he realized the truth of those words. His strength was gone, his gang defeated, his reputation in ruins. With a twist of his wrist, John disarmed him completely, sending the chair leg clattering across the debris-strewn floor. Dwayne Johnson moved to flank the leader, his massive presence ensuring there would be no escape. The leader looked from one man to the other, finally understanding that he had picked the wrong target on the wrong night. "You don't know who you're messing with," the leader gasped, trying to summon one last threat. "My brothers will come looking for you. This isn't over." Dwayne's laugh was deep and genuine, the sound of a man who had heard empty threats from worthless bullies too many times to count. "Your brothers?" he asked, gesturing at the groaning figures scattered around the diner. "You mean these heroes lying on the floor? I don't think they'll be looking for a rematch anytime soon." Indeed, the other bikers were in no condition to continue fighting. Most were struggling just to sit up, nursing bruised ribs, split lips, and wounded pride. The few who could still walk were making their way slowly toward the door, casting fearful glances over their shoulders. The leader tried one more time to salvage his dignity. He straightened up, puffed out his chest, and attempted to recreate the menacing presence he had carried when he first walked through the door. But the magic was gone. Without his gang's support and faced with 2 men who had proven they wouldn't be intimidated, he looked like what he really was, a coward who preyed on the weak. "This is harassment," he declared, his voice cracking slightly. "I'll call the police." Letitia stepped forward for the first time since the violence began. Her uniform was wrinkled, her cap was gone, and one cheek still showed the red mark from his slap, but she carried herself with a dignity that seemed to fill the room. "Please do," she said firmly. "I'd love to tell them how you and your friends assaulted a working woman for the crime of asking for basic respect." The leader's face flushed red as he realized his threat had backfired. In his world of intimidation and violence, calling the police was supposed to be something his victims feared, not welcomed. John placed a gentle but unmistakable hand on the leader's shoulder. "Here's what's going to happen," he explained in the tone someone might use with a particularly slow child. "You and your friends are going to leave. You're going to pay for the damage you caused. And you're never going to come back here again. And if we see you bothering this lady or anyone else," Dwayne added, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "we'll finish what we started here tonight." The leader looked around the destroyed diner, overturned tables, broken chairs, shattered glass covering the floor like deadly snow. His gang was beaten, his reputation was in ruins, and he was facing 2 men who had just proven they could back up any threat they made. Slowly, Painfully, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn wallet. With shaking hands, he counted out several $100s and placed them on the counter next to where Letitia stood. For the damage, he mumbled, unable to meet her eyes. But Letitia wasn't done with him yet. Years of swallowing insults, enduring disrespect, and accepting less than she deserved had built up inside her like steam in a kettle. Now, with two guardian angels standing beside her, she felt strong enough to say what needed to be said. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice steady and clear. The leader reluctantly raised his eyes to meet hers. "I am not trash," she said, each word carefully enunciated. "I am not less than human. I am a woman working an honest job, trying to make an honest living, and I deserve the same respect you would give to anyone else. Do you understand me?" The leader nodded quickly, desperate to escape the crushing weight of her righteous anger. "Say it," she demanded. "Say you understand." I understand," he whispered, the words seeming to physically hurt him. "Good," Letitia said simply. "Now get out of my diner." The leader needed no further encouragement. He helped his groaning companions to their feet and herded them toward the door like a shepherd with a flock of wounded sheep. The sounds of motorcycle engines starting up filled the night air, but there was no swagger in the sound now, no aggressive revving. Just the noise of defeated men eager to put distance between themselves and their humiliation. As the last engine faded into the distance, silence fell over the diner once again. But it was a different kind of silence than before, not the peace of routine, but the quiet that comes after storm has passed and the world begins to heal. Letitia looked around at the damage and felt an unexpected laugh bubble up from her chest. "Well," she said, gesturing at the chaos, "this is going to be interesting to explain to my boss." John and Dwayne both chuckled, the tension of the fight finally beginning to leave their shoulders. "I think most people will understand," John said with a smile. "Sometimes things have to get broken before they can be fixed properly." Dwayne nodded toward the money the leader had left on the counter. "That should cover the repairs and then some. Maybe even enough for some upgrades." Letitia picked up the bills and shook her head in amazement. "I still can't believe you did that. You don't even know me." "We know enough," Dwayne said simply. "We know you're someone who deserves to be treated with respect. We know you're someone who stood up for herself when it mattered," John added. "That takes real courage." As the three of them began the task of cleaning up the diner, picking up broken dishes, and righting overturned furniture, Letitia felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by people who would stand up for what was right. The diner would reopen stronger than before. The story would be told and retold until it became legend, and Letitia Washington would never again doubt that she deserved respect, dignity, and a place in the world where she could hold her head high. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected packages, delivered by unlikely heroes who understand that the measure of a person isn't found in their strength, but in how they choose to use it.